So what's the first thing you think about when you hear the word government? You probably think of this face, or this, or this. It actually varies depending on how old you are or what's in the news recently. The Prime Minister is often what comes to your mind. He's the leader of the country and the federal government. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. Canada is a federal state, where power is divided between a federal government and smaller regional governments. Each government has its own area of responsibility. At the top, we've got the federal government, which takes care of big-picture stuff that affects the whole country, like defense, foreign policy, interprovincial trade and communications, currency, navigation, criminal law and citizenship. Then we have the provincial and territorial government, which supposedly knows best what the people of their province need. So they manage things closer to home, like the municipal government and also schools, healthcare, property, civil rights and highways. Some areas like immigration and agriculture are shared between the provincial and federal government. That's why some provinces did have a more firm stance on immigration to counter the aggressive immigration policies of the federal government. Quebec is a good example, with their protective approach. That is also why Alberta has low provincial tax in Canada, or physiotherapy in Saskatchewan is covered by public health care, or Quebec gets to have the best social family benefits in the entire country. All that is thanks to federalism, which allows different provinces to adopt policies made specifically for the needs of their own population, while providing an overarching support from the federal government. Now, municipal governments are responsible for cities or regions, handling the stuff that actually directly impacts your day-to-day life. These are your city councils and mayors. Think garbage collection, public transit, parks, libraries, local roads, and zoning laws, which regulate where your next favorite coffee shop can be built or a gym, or how high your house can be. Municipal government is supposed to be the closest to its people, but their authority is dictated by the provincial or territorial government. That means their powers can vary depending on whether or not your provincial government is a micromanager or not. Toronto, for instance, doesn't have that much wiggle room and is in a very tight claw of the provincial government due to its significance for the province's and country's economy. That's why Doug Ford feels the need to dictate the removal of bike lanes from the streets of Toronto.
There was a time in Ontario when the provincial government focused on the really big issues. Not anymore. Doug Ford's government is different. Exhibit A, deciding where the capital city can and cannot put bike lanes.
So if your local roads are bad, or you want more parks, kids' playgrounds, or bike lanes in the city, the best way to make that change is to reach out to your local city council or mayor to make that happen. Knocking on the federal prime minister door will not get us far. In fact, what's curious is that there are some things that even the prime minister needs to get permission for.
Canada is a constitutional monarchy, and that means that the Canada's official head of state is the monarch of the United Kingdom, King Charles III, for now. But of course, King Charles doesn't have all the time in the world to take care after all Commonwealth countries' governments. That's why there is a Governor-General for that. The Governor-General is the King's representative sitting in Canada, and they're appointed by the monarch on the advice of the Prime Minister. The Governor-General performs tasks like giving royal assent to laws, which means that it makes bills into laws. They also represent His Majesty the King at events, as well as summoning, proroguing, and dissolving the Canadian Parliament. For instance, Justin Trudeau had to seek permission from the Governor-General to resign and to prorogue the Parliament this week. Constitutional monarchy is a system of government where a country recognizes a monarch as the official head of state, but their powers are still limited by a constitution and laws. But wait, isn't Canada a democracy? Yes, Canada is also a parliamentary democracy. In this system, citizens of the country elect representatives, or MPs, to Parliament, and this Parliament becomes responsible for making laws, allocating budgets, and governing the country. So here's the thing, naturally we think that we get to elect all the persons who sit in the Parliament. But that's actually not the case. The Canadian Parliament consists of two chambers, the House of Commons, which gets elected with the MPs, and the Senate does not get elected. The House of Commons is made out of 338 members of parliament. Common means community, means people. The 338 members of parliament represent the communities or geographic areas that Canada is divided into. Each such area is called a riding. Toronto, for example, has 25 ridings. Each of these areas has a representative sitting in Ottawa in the parliament. There are 5 major parties in Canada: the Liberals, Conservatives, NDP, Bloc Québécois, and the Green Party. There are a few smaller parties that exist in Canada, but the main focus is on these 5. Each member of parliament also belongs to one of these parties. When a sizable amount of MPs of a certain party get elected in a province, that creates a certain reputation for the province. For example, if we open House of Commons website, we can see that Alberta is heavily conservative, with the 30 MPs belonging to the Conservative Party of Canada. Ontario is mostly Liberal, with 75 MPs belonging to the Liberal Party, and only 38 from the Conservatives. So if you're from Ontario, that's where you probably start wondering, how come that the Premier of Ontario is Conservative, yet the Ontario is Liberal? Hold that thought, we'll come back to it in a minute. The political party that has the most number of MPs in the House of Commons forms the Government of Canada, and their leader of choice gets to be the Prime Minister of Canada. That person acts as the head of government and runs the country's administration, for as long as he or she has the confidence of the Parliament and the people. What keeps things interesting is accountability. The ruling government needs the support of the Parliament to stay in power. If the current minister loses the support of enough MPs, he or she can lose a key vote, and that could mean a new election or a shake-up in leadership. That's something that we've heard a lot about in the last year, as there were many attempts to vote non-confidence for Trudeau before he finally got the message and resigned himself. What I found interesting in his resignation speech is the mention of
internal battles.
He referred to an interesting dynamic in the parliament that can make it really hard to get anything done. When MPs get elected, there can be several scenarios. You can have a majority government, when one party controls more seats than the rest of the parties together. That makes it so much easier to pass laws because you have somewhat of a consensus. But in the minority government, the ruling party has the most seats, but not the majority compared to the all other parties together. This means that the ruling party needs help from others to get things done, adding a layer of negotiation and constant compromise. Moreover, other parties can form an alliance and kick the ruling party out. The current Liberal Party is a minority government. They tried to mitigate that by forming an alliance with NDP to try to get things done, but some will probably say that that did not work out that well, and the party was set up to fail from day one.
About 40% of the world uses the Parliamentary Democracy system. It is pretty common. It's considered efficient because Parliament keeps the government accountable and vice versa. However, it's not that efficient in Canada if you look a little deeper. This is where things get a bit messy, not Ronaldo. So, there are 3 parts to the Parliament. The Sovereign, King Charles III, represented by the Governor-General. Then the Senate, and the House of Commons. We have the House of Commons figured out. It consists of members of parliament who are elected by citizens in federal elections. Don't mix it up with the provincial government, since that's a different level of government. When 338 federal MPs make decisions, provincial governments aren't invited. They don't participate in federal decisions, although they do interact on different occasions. That's the first disconnect that I found interesting. Going back to the example of Ontario, where 75 Liberal MPs come from this province and represent 75 communities of Ontario over 38 Conservative communities. Yet, the provincial government is led by a Conservative member. The vote for provincial representatives is also separate from the vote for federal members of parliament. It is similar to a federal vote, but is done on a smaller, provincial scale. People who are residents of a given province vote to elect provincial representatives from their local ridings to the provincial government specifically. This is known as Legislative Assembly. Provincial elections run every 4 years and are on a schedule separate from federal elections. In a fashion similar to the federal elections, the provincial party with the most seats in the provincial legislature forms the provincial government, and its leader becomes the premier of the province or territory. That's how Ontario, let's say, ends up choosing mostly Liberal members of parliament to represent them in Ottawa on the federal level, but on the provincial level, Conservatives get elected to represent the people of Ontario. But a bigger mess happens in the Senate. Let's talk about the Senate in more detail. The Senate is often referred to as the chamber of sober second thought in Canada's parliament. This definition was coined by Macdonald, who was formerly Canada's first prime minister. He envisioned the Senate as the place where the laws passed by the elected House of Commons could be carefully reviewed and refined by a bunch of non-elected individuals appointed by the Prime Minister, and they consider themselves more experienced and knowledgeable than the House of Commons. Senators can suggest changes, delay a bill, or even reject it, though outright rejection is apparently rare. So in today's world, the Senate is a group of people that each sitting Prime Minister appoints at their own will. Nobody but the Prime Minister have a say at who gets to be in the Senate. But that's not all. Once you make it to the Senate, you stay there for life, until the age of 75. This might sound undemocratic, but the idea is that senators can focus on the country's long-term interests without worrying about people-pleasing to get re-elected. Nevertheless, the idea of having an unelected group of individuals running the country is rather controversial. Looking at the list of current senators, you will notice that most of them are 60 or 70 years old, which means that old people get to make decisions that influence young generations who get to live in this country longer and deal with the consequences. And that's why the system has been slightly reformed to emphasize transparency and merit as opposed to nepotism. The Independent Advisory Board for Senate Appointments was established in 2016. It's a non-partisan group which allows Canadians to submit Senate applications and make recommendations for candidates based on merit, regional representation, and diversity. So if you're watching this, you can vote and submit suggestions for who ends up in the Senate. Just go on the sencanada.ca website for updates or sign up for their newsletter to stay updated on when the nominations or other public engagement events happen. I highly recommend you do this if you care about the future of Canada. This is our right as citizens, and I might even stress it's our collective responsibility to be involved in the country's future. Having a say in who gets to the Senate is not the biggest way to fulfill our duties as Canadian citizens. In October this year, or likely even earlier, the federal election will happen. That's when the new Prime Minister will be elected. But wait, rewind. Who gets to decide who the Prime Minister is? When we go to vote, we vote for members of Parliament. We will be selecting people representing our communities. We don't vote for the Prime Minister. But how do we even know that the particular Prime Minister is the best candidate to become the leader of the party with the majority of seats in the House of Commons? That's where things get a little shady.
So we've talked about the 5 major parties in Canada. Any Canadian can join the political party of their choice. Most parties charge a small annual fee for membership, except for Liberals. Becoming a Liberal is free of charge. There's no official data on total party membership in Canada, but some numbers that we could dig out indicate that about 2.5 to 3% of Canadians belong to a political party in Canada. These are the people who get to decide who leads the party and eventually who gets to lead the country. The party nominates and votes for the leader. A regular, uninvolved citizen just sees the tip of the iceberg after most important decisions have already been made. In a way, most Canadians are presented with just an illusion of choice. Just 3% of the 41 million Canadian population is involved in the country's future. It's 1.2 million people. Less than half of a population of Toronto proper. In contrast, in the US, the political party membership is nearly 60%. When I learned that only 3% of Canadians participate in the political life of this country, I was flabbergasted. The smaller the party membership, the easier it is to meddle with it and influence the outcomes. The bigger the party membership gets, the harder and, in my opinion, the more fair the elections will be. Hey guys, take a look at this. So I found this table while editing this video. This is how many people who are eligible to vote actually show up in the federal elections. So what's curious is that the age group of 18 to 24 years old has the lowest participation. And it's a pretty big deal. I'll tell you why in a second. See, as you grow older towards the 65 and plus, the more people come out to vote. The voter turnout is the highest for retirees. It's the retirees and the older people who get to decide the future of Canada. They make decisions based on what they care about a lot, and it could be a higher pension, higher real estate values because they want to sell it and get a lot more money for retirement. They won't live long enough to experience the full magnitude of the consequences of their decisions, but the youth and the younger generation will. This summer we had a youth employment crisis. And everybody was really happy to blame immigration, the government, and all of that. But I think what we fail to realize is that it's the younger generations in the first place that have failed to come out and vote routinely over the decades. They're the ones who have abandoned their vote and let the older people decide what the country should look like. And I don't think it's right. And I hope this video will be a tiny nudge for you not to just come out and vote in the upcoming federal election, but also to participate in the provincial and municipal ones. And if you are 55 and plus and watching this video, and I think you are because we have at least 20% of you watching our channel, thank you. Thank you for voting. Thank you for building the future of Canada. Without you, we maybe wouldn't even have democracy. So if there is one takeaway in this video, it's this: get involved. It's in your power to make that change. Get involved, learn about the candidates, about how the Canadian political system works, and most importantly, vote. In the next 3 months, there will be a new Liberal leader elected, and most of us could have played a part in it, no matter which party we decide to vote for in the Prime Minister elections in the end. Unfortunately, we no longer get to choose who gets to lead other parties, but that's a start, and when the election day comes, vote. Where we come from, aligning with any political party is often frowned upon, even seen as shameful. Worse still, many people around the world, nearly half of the global population, don't even have the right to choose their leaders. Voting is not just a right, it's a privilege. What we stand for is knowledge and participation. Let's understand who and what we're voting for, and then take that knowledge to the ballot box later this year. Change doesn't happen overnight, but it starts with each of us showing up for ourselves, for our children, and for the future of our country.
Hey guys, thank you so much for watching. We don't like to get political, but given everything that's going on in the country right now, it felt important to dive into this topic for our own sake. And we felt compelled to share this with you. 3% getting to decide the future of 97% of Canadians just doesn't feel right, and I hope we all can change it. Thank you again for watching, and let us know if we missed anything important in this very brief intro into the Canadian politics. If you'd like to learn more, we recommend these 2 videos from J.J. McCullough, where he dives deeper into the political system of Canada and how it works. There is also a study guide that every candidate for Canadian citizenship has to learn to pass the test. I highly recommend you read that as well. We will leave a link to it below. If you'd like to support our channel, you can do it by becoming a member or checking our Canada-themed merch. And if the YouTube algorithm got it right, you will enjoy this video next, and I'll see you there. Take care!